Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into evolving political institutions with your host, Dr. Bill O'Brien, the Executive Director of the Virtual Center. Here's Dr. Bill.
Okay, and welcome everyone to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Wednesday. It is the 29th day of January. It remains cold, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. So at least that's what all the weather folks are saying, as there's going to be a significant warm-up after tonight. We're going to get really cold tonight. Now, this is just here in the east, but I think it's affecting such a large portion of the nation that I think it probably affects a lot of folks that are listening. It is 3 p.m. on this Wednesday in the East. We're starting an hour early today, and I neglected to alert listeners yesterday that we would be starting an hour early today. My choice is to either start an hour early, recognizing that some people probably won't be joining us until our second hour, figuring that that's when we begin, or I could start at the regular time and just cut the program short by an hour. And we kind of decided that we'd go this route, and because so many people pick up the program on iPod and those kinds of things anyway, that and listen to it later. In other words, that we would try to get the 2 hours in. And there's really a difference, because if I wanted to deal with the standards today, and if we were just going to do 1 hour, I was just going to launch directly into the standards, because I don't want this week to end and let another 4-day period go by before we get back together again next Monday, without at least addressing the standards a little bit and getting into this, since we're kind of on a 3-day roll here, and I want to try to wrap it up if I can today. But the fact that we're going to be doing 2 hours, I think we'll have time to do that and a few other things besides. Again, I thank you for tuning in. I invite you to participate actively. I've been telling a number of folks today about the call we received yesterday from Mike, and just a fantastic call. And the day before, we had a call from Dr. John on the road in Pennsylvania. I mean, this, if you think about this is just amazing. I guess maybe I still look at all this technology stuff as magic. And I'm like a kid. I just can't believe some of these things. To be reading an email that was sent from Sweden, and I mean, it's just wonderful. What an opportunity! What a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to learn and think and talk together and just share ideas and hopefully provide some information which would allow all of us to learn a little bit from all of it. Love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. My personal email address, if you'd like to communicate with me directly, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906@gmail.com. What I'd like to do today, as a prelude to the standards, is first of all draw a few conclusions from the material, from the criticisms of the standards that we were looking at yesterday, and then look at a couple of documents. And I'm saying this because I'm teaching a class, and we happen to be working with these particular documents anyway. They're kind of right here. I have them right here and handy. And I thought I would basically use them as illustrations of the kinds of things that I hope the standards will be able to promote on a wider scale. So basically, what I would like to do today is to complete the criticism of the standards, and then suggest or take on the question as to whether the standards can effectively work at all. In other words, whether in fact we can improve the quality of our education system for significantly more youngsters, students, than we've been able to do in the past. And then look at the standards and try to speculate a little bit as to whether, in fact, these standards, if followed and if adopted and enforced, would truly begin a turnaround in our education system. I believe, and again, I have to say at the very front, this is extremely optimistic, extremely idealistic. I understand that. But I think we're in much better shape being optimistic than pessimistic. But on the other hand, I have to acknowledge that there's an awful lot to be pessimistic about. I guess I was a little bit disappointed in the State of the Union message last night, only because I didn't think the President's message was quite optimistic and positive enough. I was really hoping for a little bit more cheerleading about economic recovery and about the creation of jobs and about improvement in our education system and all the rest of it. I got a little bit of that with increasing the minimum wage and starting retirement programs for the working poor in a program that he calls MyRA. But it wasn't as much as I'd hoped. I kind of think this was the fifth State of the Union message that this president has delivered, the first one of his second term, and I thought that the second one of his second term, and for by this time next year, everybody's going to be looking at the 2016 elections, and the fall elections. The fall elections this year will have been over. So, for all practical purposes, I think the president's going to be moving into the lame duck status of his second administration a year from now. So the reason I say that is because I kind of thought that this was really, in some ways, his last opportunity to really take on his opponents and really begin to push. And he pushed, but not quite as hard as I'd hoped. But anyway, be that as it may, let's begin. If you remember, we were looking at first. We looked at conservatives who criticize the Common Core, and of course their major focus. We looked at George Will, and their major focus is on obviously on the fact that it seems to amount to a federal takeover of education when the tradition of this nation has been that education is a locally controlled thing, controlled by community and parents and teachers and local businesses and these kinds of things. And because of the accountability factor built into standards and built into the standardized testing that goes along with it, accountability is going to be to those who evaluate the test results rather than to the parents and the communities that traditionally have controlled education in this society. And the line that I quoted yesterday during Mike's call, and I wanted to repeat it again because I think it's very, very significant. It's only one line. The question that the critics, conservative critics, raise about the standards, once you accept the fact that parents and local communities and local businesses are pretty much losing control of what happens in the schools in their own districts, as accountability is increasingly wielded out of Washington with the results in the analysis of the results of these standardized tests. The question that is raised: to whom can parents complain when their children come home with a book that threatens the values of their community, of their family, excuse me, of their community would work just as well. In other words, if parents don't like what their kids are being asked to read, who do they complain to? Obviously, that question is pretty much in line with conservative concerns about the flow of power and decision-making, the centralizing of education in the hands of Washington bureaucrats. But I would suggest something else that's not considered. And that is that except for the very young children, youngsters who come home with books that seem to advocate values that aren't consistent with those in the family, if the child is really being educated, the child will be able to recognize the dichotomy in values. And that becomes part of the education. In other words, the answer to this question about to whom can parents complain, if true education was really happening, students themselves could handle these kinds of concerns. But that seems to not be in anybody's frame of reference. Nobody seems to think about that. Instead, what they're focusing on, whether decisions are being made in Washington or decisions are being made in state capitals or decisions are being made at county courthouses or whatever. In other words, the major concern that these people who are most concerned about the standards have is a concern about who makes the decisions. The one thing that is never considered is to begin educating youngsters in a way which allows them to become masters of their own fate. They can recognize dichotomies in values. They can recognize the inconsistencies between the values that they've been adjusted to or acquainted with in their local communities versus the kind of values that they're getting in literature. I go back to the story we saw some weeks ago in 1816 about the Senate's passage of tax legislation which imposed a high import tax on foreign books in order to discourage foreign books from coming into the United States, thereby protecting our young people from alien, strange, or dangerous values. I would suggest to you that education itself can be the best protection against dangerous and alien values. But we in this society have never been willing to risk that. Our approach has always been to make sure that we control what kids learn and memorize so that we determine the values that these kids will come out of school with. I would suggest to you that the value system that goes along with that approach to education doesn't run very deep. And consequently, we end up with a lot of young people that are very confused and very conflicted and finally decide that it's not worth worrying about anyway. Instead of weighing alternative value systems and focusing on a value system that seems to work for each individual, instead we have turned our education system into a power struggle between ideologues on different sides of the political aisle, each of them competing for the right to control the minds of our children. The missing element is the decision that they all ought to be able to reach, that the best thing we can do is educate our youngsters in such a way that their minds develop in such ways that they can handle these controversies for themselves. And I think that's very consistent. In order to bring this particular facet of the story to a conclusion, I think that it's very significant that the final conclusion on the standards seems to be to go back to 1966. James Coleman's report on equality of educational opportunity. Many of those who were listening that are a little bit older that can remember the mid-60s might remember that the Coleman study was a major research study, which suggested that part of the problem with education and the idea of equality of opportunity in this society was that the family in this nation was under serious strains and attack. The family structure, the two-parent family, was breaking down in America. And the general conclusion of Coleman's research was, if we're going to fix the schools, we've got to fix the family first. And what his research focused on was the relationship among families, communities, and educational success. And his conclusion was, when you get all of those lined up and in sync, value systems improve, behavior improves, crime diminishes, and educational results improve. The major focus of his study, remember this is in the mid-60s, is that we've tried for years the strategy of throwing money at our education system, and his conclusion is that the amount of money you put into the schools is not the answer. It's a fairly substantial bit of research. The research involves a sample of over 650,000 students in 4,000 schools that are randomly selected around the nation. What Coleman did was collect statistics on a variety of characteristics, including racial segregation, dollars expended per pupil, the degrees, the college degrees that teachers held, the sizes and holdings of school libraries, and family background. I'm quoting from the article here. Coleman's watershed discovery was that despite clear differences in educational results between white and black students, there was little difference in educational funding. The monetary support for white and black students compared with rural, suburban, and urban environments was about the same. Money and material resources could not sufficiently explain the differences in student achievement. And then these critics of the standards go back to that study in the mid-60s and then bring it up to today as criticisms of the standards. Alan Ornstein, professor of education at St. John's University in New York City, wrote in 2010, 3 years ago, U.S. students consistently score on achievement tests below students in other industrialized nations, despite the fact that we spend more money per student on education than all other countries except Switzerland. Indeed, after spending nearly $500 billion on compensatory programs for low-income and low-achieving students, educators are still unable to determine which programs work and whether more spending affects educational outcomes or not. Coleman also discovered that the factors most closely related to educational success were family characteristics, parents' education, income, number of siblings, etc. In 1982 and again in 1987, Coleman and his colleagues published data from continuous research they were doing, the publication entitled High School Achievement, Public, Catholic, and Other Private Schools Compared, and Public and Private High Schools, the Impact of Communities. These were extensive statistical analyses trying to find differences between school types. And the research, tied together with Coleman's earlier research, led to some interesting conclusions, which he wrote in an essay he published in 1988 entitled Social Capital and the Creation of Human Capital. Coleman focused on three crucial discoveries that emerged as a result of his research. One, children from two-parent households have a significantly lower dropout rate than children from single-parent households. Two, the raw dropout rates are much lower for religious schools than for public and non-religious private schools. Public school students drop out at a rate of 14.4%. Non-religious private schools at a rate of 11.9%. Catholic school students at a rate of 3.4%. And non-Catholic religious schools at a rate of 3.7%. Consequently, if you go to a religious-based school rather than a public school, you are much less likely to drop out of school. His third finding, frequency of attendance at religious services. What Coleman found, that people who regularly go to services, religious services, church, mass, whatever, is strongly related to the dropout rate, with a 19.5% of public school students who rarely or never attend dropping out, compared with 9.1% of those who attend religious services often. Consequently, from these conclusions, Coleman finally puts it all together. Educational success is dependent on the child's ability to participate in healthy families and healthy communities. Not just Catholic communities, because other creeds also had low dropout rates. Healthy families and healthy communities, he surmised, are the ones that have what he calls closure, meaning they are structurally sound and that they confess and embody a unity of ideas and values, what he calls a common good. Closure can exist within families, also between families, that is, within a community of families where the value system tends to be rather stable and rather secure. In other words, the same families and the same communities tend to interact together and they tend to believe the same things. There's a higher likelihood of closure within religious communities because participating families presumably believe one and the same thing and behave according to the same prescribed code. In essence, and this is me talking now, I'm not reading from anybody. In essence, what Coleman is suggesting is that what we need to find in order to fix our schools is a way to recover the old 17th century Puritan communities where ultimately everybody subscribed to the same religious beliefs and value systems. And everybody looked at education as a way to distribute the education in order to perpetuate those values. Children who grow up in that kind of a tight community tend not to drop out. Of course, in Puritan communities, you couldn't. Your parents would be arrested if you didn't go to school. In a sense, then, what we have here is an interesting, I think, an interesting concept as a conclusion to concerns about the standards. If no amount of money and no amount of manipulating standards in any way is going to work, because the only way that you can significantly improve our educational results is to find ways to strengthen the community strengthen the family, strengthen our communities, and strengthen the value systems within those communities, if that's the only way that you can improve our education system, then we're talking about something that's going to take a long, long time. Therefore, we might as well get about it and put all of these educational reform things like the Common Core standards on hold, because they're not going to work anyway. The conclusion of this article: to fix American education, we must first fix American families. The American mind will not be reopened until American virtue is recovered. In other words, we're wasting our time focusing on education. We need to focus on the families and the value systems which are responsible for raising our young people. Once we get the kind of children we want, then education will work. I would suggest to you that solution is, for all practical purposes, a non-solution. At least I believe that it amounts to a wrong solution. And so they are really, in a sense, taking on comments by people like Bill Gates, who in the Wall Street Journal made the comment that, quote, "It's ludicrous to think that multiplication in Alabama and multiplication in New York are really different." Consequently, Bill Gates and the others who advocate the standards are suggesting that by internationally benchmarking our standards on a national scale, every student will learn at the same pace, and that will fix the variations in state performance, and thereby the Common Core becomes the cure-all for American education. And what these people are suggesting is, until we fix the family in America, we don't have a chance of fixing our education system. So in a sense, doing nothing is the best strategy. That bothers me. And while there are real criticisms, I think the so-called progressive or liberal criticism of the standards is that they really don't do anything in order to make up for the deficiencies that cause some of our children to have less of a chance than others. But the fact of the matter is, I don't believe that the situation is hopeless. And so consequently, I'd like to address, turn to an approach. And rather than go directly into the standards, I'd like to provide perhaps an illustration of what kinds of things we might start doing. I mean, we're talking about something that would be extremely long-term and extremely difficult. But it is a strategy. And I think, if I can successfully do this and make my point, then I think by looking at the standards, I think we'll begin to realize that the standards are the closest thing to trying to accomplish real significant change in our education system. I have no doubt that there are problems with the standards. It bothers me, as it bothered our caller yesterday, as to who's pushing and putting substantial amounts of money into this Common Core standard, the big push. There's no question that people have an agenda. This idea of all these national tests, this is potentially a tremendous money-making operation for a lot of people. There are those who believe, and I tend to kind of lean a little bit this way as well. I think some people would be guilty of this. I really believe that by raising the bar, by making the standards much more rigid, and I go back to the example that we looked at yesterday about you take a bar that's at 5 feet and a student can't get over it at 5 feet. So the way you fix the problem is you raise the bar to 6 feet and tell the student to jump higher. In other words, you haven't done anything to address the deficiencies that made it impossible for that student to clear 5 feet. What makes you think they're going to be able to clear 6 feet just by trying harder? I really believe that a lot of people would fall into that category. But I also believe that the standards at least suggest a direction that might work. And what I thought I'd do as a kind of a prelude to looking at some of the standards themselves is to actually try to provide some sort of preview as to what might happen. One of the things that I've been convinced of for a long time, I used to do workshops. For several years, I did a workshop on this kind of thing, was the linkage or the connection between work standards, career skills, and academic skills. Most people tend to look at them as separate things. One of the major criticisms of the Common Core standards from conservatives is that the standards turn our entire educational system into job training for employers. By focusing on career skills, you're really focusing principally on making sure that everybody can get a job, whether in fact people are really being educated or not. And one of the things that I have stressed for a long time, and I've tried to do it in classes that I teach, and I've tried to do it in workshops that I've developed, is that liberal learning, what is called liberal learning, with the kinds of skills that are evident in these standards, is in effect career preparation as well. The kind of skills that drive quality education in the classroom are the same skills that employers are screaming for. The ability to read well and write well. The ability to think abstractly. The ability to work together in groups to solve problems. The ability to do research. The ability to collect data, evaluate the data, and write up the results. The ability to work together successfully in teams. The ability to solve problems. The ability to work with other people in solving problems. Every one of these skills that employers have been screaming for and claim that our schools are not turning out students who have these skills, every one of them are skills that are part of a quality education. If you ask the right kinds of questions of information, instead of just memorizing the facts, then by asking the right kinds of questions of what we read and what we listen to, we find ourselves drawing on the very skills that employers are asking for. The need to do research, the need to collect more information, the need to address things like inferences and secondary agendas and hidden agendas and reading between the lines and all of it. I'd like to provide a couple of examples of that if I can. I have one example that's rather short and one example that's a little bit longer. But I hope that I can make this point. I have in my hand a quotation. This is out of a textbook that we use, American history textbook. And this is a quote that appears in the chapter on the Industrial Revolution after the Civil War, the emergence of industry, the birth or the growth of large corporations, and the efforts of business to try to keep government out of the regulation business in order to let business have its head, its freedom. And the result of that in the late 19th century is, of course, the Industrial Revolution. And the United States goes from a hope-to-be industrialized nation at the end of the Civil War to one of the major industrial powers of the world at 35 years later by the turn of the century in 1900. That's the period of the Industrial Revolution. This is a quote. And the author of this quote is the legal counsel for John D. Rockefeller. His name is Dodd, S.T. Dodd. And in the course of one of his speeches, he says the following: "You might as well endeavor to stay the formation of the clouds, the falling of the rains, or the flowing of the streams, as to attempt by any means or in any manner to prevent organization of industry, association of persons, and the aggregation of capital." Unquote. That's a quotation. This is a primary source. And what I mean is, it's an exact copy of what this man said well over a century ago during the height of the Industrial Revolution, during the period when John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil came into prominence. So again, let me repeat it. It's only one sentence. You might as well endeavor to stay the formation of the clouds, the falling of the rains, or the flowing of the streams, as to attempt by any means or in any manner to prevent organization of industry, associations of persons, and the aggregation of capital. Unquote. Students read that and go right on without ever thinking, what exactly does that mean? What is he saying? So let's start to look at what he's saying. You might as well endeavor to stay the formation of clouds. You've got as much chance of preventing the formation of clouds in the sky as you have of preventing industry from organizing, i.e., corporations from forming, capital from being accumulated, associations of persons being created, and wealth being generated. You got as much chance of stopping that as you have preventing the formation of clouds in the sky, or the falling of rain, or the flowing of streams. I might add as an aside, here in West Virginia, we found a way to stop the streams from flowing, but that's another issue for another day. What Dodd is suggesting is that free people who have their freedom, will use their freedom and their common sense to pursue the things that are necessary to accumulate and generate wealth, to create wealth. And the only way that you can stop these things from happening is to take away people's freedom. But if you give people their head and you let people do what they do best, You don't have any more chance of regulating corporations or controlling the amount of money they make or what they do with it than you have of stopping the formation of clouds or the falling of the rain or the flowing of the rivers. In other words, what we do that we call industrial capitalism is what nature does. What we're doing is as natural as the formation of clouds, the flowing of streams, and the falling of rain. And you have no more chance of stopping us, or of regulating us, or controlling us, or directing what we do and how we do it. You have no more chance of doing that than you have of stopping nature itself. What makes free enterprise capitalism successful is that it functions by the same laws of nature that nature itself does. We're doing what comes naturally. The way we have organized free enterprise capitalism is totally consistent with human nature itself. The reason it works is because this is the way people really are. They want to be free. They want to be successful. They want to get rich. They want to make money. And they have a mind. And they will find ways to organize with people and to raise the kind of money they need and invest it in ways that will produce profit and generate more wealth and create wealth and expand the economy and create jobs and all the rest of it. There's no way to stop that. This is the way nature intended man to live. My point in all of this is that you can take that one sentence from Rockefeller's legal counsel, Mr. Dodd, and read it to students. What that means is, even if they can't read it, they can hear it. They know what it means. They can think, even if they don't read well. And if you ask them the right kinds of questions about what this guy is saying and what he means by what he says. What does he mean by this? What is he saying? You ask these kinds of questions. What's he most afraid of? Well, he's most afraid of somebody trying to interfere with the organization of industry, the association of persons, and the aggregation of capital. Where would that interference most likely come from? Government. Regulators, agencies, the EPA. So consequently, what he's basically suggesting is that what we're doing is natural, and what those who oppose we're doing and advocate government regulation of what we do, what they're trying to do is unnatural. It won't work, and it puts progress and civilization itself at risk. Everything this nation has been and is and currently is, everything that this nation hopes to be, in a world which is becoming increasingly more productive because of the application of science to industry, everything that we ever hoped to be would be at risk if government doesn't stay out of our business and let us do what we do best, which is generate wealth, make money, expand the economy, create jobs, and provide new opportunities for more and more people to be successful in their natural human quest to be rich. I would suggest to you that if you take that one sentence and spend one class on that one sentence, you have effectively covered everything that is contained in chapter after chapter after chapter about free enterprise, about the way the economy works, about the history of the Industrial Revolution, about the logical efforts of labor, of workers to unite and organize in order to try to combat this, about efforts to try to enlist government on your side because the process as it's operating has got you at a distinct disadvantage. In other words, everything that we ask our children to read and memorize related to the Industrial Revolution and the emergence of industrial capitalism in America is contained in that one sentence if the instructor knows the kinds of questions to ask of the content. But the instructor has to know this before you can ask the instructor to teach these skills to children. And in answering these questions, what are children doing? They are thinking. They are reflecting. They are learning. They are seeing implications of information. In other words, here's a piece of information, but what is the long-term implications of this? If everything that Dodd says comes to pass, what kind of a nation are we going to have? What does he want? What is he afraid of? What's his greatest hope? What's his greatest fear? If you start to ask those questions, each child in your class literally could write the chapter on the Industrial Revolution in America. Because they would know the kinds of questions that generate the kinds of answers that becomes the stuff of the chapters in textbooks. I would suggest to you that that's what happens in high-powered educational institutions. That's the kind of education that people who can afford it are willing to pay big bucks in order to enable their children to be exposed to. Why can't it happen in our public education? Why can't every kid have a chance to understand economics and the emergence of the Industrial Revolution and all the rest of it? You say your kids can't read well enough to understand, to comprehend that sentence enough? I would suggest to you that once children begin to experience the kinds of answers and information that comes out of their own head if they know which questions to ask, they'll learn to read. Because it'll quickly dawn on them that I can learn and I can understand and I can think and I can reflect and I can offer suggestions and considerations that are just as good as anybody else can. The only thing that's holding me back is I have trouble reading. Somebody has to read it to me. If I can get to the point where I can learn to read myself, I can get this information and I can educate myself. I would suggest to you that once a child reaches that point, once a child really engages content and is able to extract the meaning that's there from the content, then that child's educational potential becomes unlimited. That's the freedom of equality of opportunity that Lincoln and other key spokesmen in the nation's history are talking about when they say that education will set you free. Memorizing a bunch of meaningless information so that you can regurgitate it on a test That's not going to set anybody free. But being able to understand what's natural and what's not natural, why some people are more successful than other people, and being able to recognize that a fact is not immune from asking questions and digging deeper and asking why and what if. What if this didn't happen? What if that happened? What if, in American history, what if Dodd and John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie and J. Pierpont Morgan and the rest of them had not been successful? What if government immediately came out of the Civil War and began to rigidly, strictly regulate and control economic development and the industrial process in America? Would America have gone into the 20th century as a major industrial power in the world? Would the West have experienced two major world wars in the 20th century that in large part were driven over the competition between nations for access to more and more of the raw materials and resources and markets necessary to make this proposal of Dodd work? What we're suggesting here is that the history of the world is a competition among nations for controlling the resources in order to generate the wealth that makes your nation less dependent on others, but forces them to become more dependent on you. And the result is the world ends up in two major world wars. Would maybe those wars have been avoided if thinking, rational, sensitive human beings recognized the long-term implications of this thing without any controls or any management at all, and actually managed the process in such a way that there weren't a few winners and huge numbers of losers, where everybody indeed could benefit from this and basically generate for themselves a quality standard of life and a quality education for their kids and an opportunity for potential to have potential in the future, promise for the future. Even nature itself is, Darwin said that, but this is the part of Darwin that nobody quotes. Nature itself is managed somewhat. In other words, living things, plants, animals, that would die for lack of resources, sun, water, nutrients, whatever, can be kept alive by bringing in the proper nutrients and making up for the natural deficiencies that exist in nature. It is absolutely naive to assume, it is absolutely cruel to assume that societies are engaged in a struggle for existence similar to what Darwin's research found in the natural world among plants and animals. The greatest potential for the most people would be to take the best aspects of this and manage it and control it and make sure that everybody got some of it so that nobody was left out. But if you don't do that, which is kind of government's responsibility in order to, quote, promote the public interest, unquote, if Dodd is successful, which he was, and Rockefeller is successful, and Morgan and Vanderbilt and the rest of them in this period, the corporate so-called robber barons of this period, are pretty successful in keeping business out, and the fact of the matter is the United States becomes a major industrial power. But the United States is also experiencing some of the most horrendous working and living conditions on the face of the earth. And human beings are suffering and dying as a result. And to suggest that we just have to put up with this, that's part of what you pay in order to have progress. I don't know. I don't think that makes logical sense to anyone. My point has been here that if you look at that line, that one sentence, and you can extract from it what's really there, and you can teach students how to do that, you are teaching them in order to confirm your suspicions. You need to be able to do more research. You can organize into teams. You look for this, I'll look for this. We'll get back together in 2 days, and we'll put together the results we find, and we'll see what we've got. You can create you can build teams, working teams. You can address problems. You can do research. You can employ the latest technology in terms of the internet and Google and all the rest of it. You can take advantage of what's in libraries. You can get youngsters into the habit of reading critically rather than just memorizing pieces of information that don't make any sense to them. They don't understand it. And then most of the time they're taught by a teacher who can't explain it either. This is what this nation has never been willing to try. We're willing to do it for the few. But to unleash this kind of education to the masses, to expect the masses of the people, unless they do really have some sort of a learning disability or something, to give youngsters, all youngsters, the freedom and the option of questioning things that they ought not have the right to question. We've never been willing to risk that. We've always been much more secure in controlling what kids believe than whether in fact we educate them or not. And I go back to Jefferson and his plan for the general diffusion of knowledge in Virginia. You make every child require by law to go to school for 3 years. And as Jefferson says, the seeds of future order are laid there in those 3 years. That's where the value system is transmitted. And then, except for those whose parents have the resources to send them on at their own expense, you dismiss the residue. You select the boy of best genius from each group or each class or each school, and you dismiss the rest. And what you're saying is, this particular child has shown the ability potentially to lead. We will educate him. These other people in the competition have not prevailed. Therefore, what we have done is we have taught them the value system which says, look to these people that we are educating to lead. Look for them for leadership. Because in a free competitive situation, you have proven that you are not leadership quality. You are part of the residue. In today's competitive, information-driven, technological world, given the kinds of things we've been looking at in recent programs here, we cannot continue to consider 70 and 75% of our young population residue. We have got to find alternatives. And I suggest we'll take a break here. We're right at the top of the hour. That when we come back, I'd like to provide yet one additional source, which is actually about the same thing. This is from Andrew Carnegie himself. This is from his very famous Gospel of Wealth article that appeared in the North American Review in 1889. I'd just like to look at a couple of paragraphs and share it with you, and then basically focus on exactly what one can see within those paragraphs. And I would suggest to you that kids can understand this. Kids are challenged by this. Kids are, once they discover that they can learn and they can think and they know how to play this game, they can play it. Whether they choose to or whether they choose to go off and do something else, at least it's their call, not the call of some impersonal bureaucrat who basically is saying your test scores indicate that you're not capable of doing that. Here are the things that you're capable of doing. And we call that academic counseling. It's potentially pretty discouraging sometimes. I think that when we look at these standards, we're going to see the possibility, at least, of something quite different. We're at the top of the hour, and let's pause, take a 4 or 5 minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll do our final hour of today, as well as this week at the Virtual Center. I'm Bill O'Brien. I want to thank you for being with us and encourage you to stay tuned. We'll be right back. Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and thank you for that wonderful music. I actually was almost reluctant to get back on the air.
Vladimir Horowitz.
Absolutely unbelievable. Thank you. God, what a pleasure. For those of you who are just joining us here at the Virtual Center today, welcome. And I know some of you are probably joining feeling that this is our regular start time. And we had to begin an hour early today because I have to end it an hour early in order to attend a meeting, and I neglected to remind folks of that yesterday, and I apologize for that. But the program is archived, and you can get it at the White Rose Society or an iPod or however, whatever other mechanism you might use in order to listen to these some of these programs at a later time. I want to thank you. For those of you who've been with us through the entire program, I want to thank you for staying with us. And I hope that that's a positive sign. That some of the things that we are trying to do here are really worth your valuable time. And I know there are more and more demands all the time on our time. So I appreciate the fact that you're willing to give some of it as it becomes more valuable and more scarce to the Virtual Center and to the Head On Radio Network. I know that Bob Kincaid and his folks appreciate it as well. The responsibility that we have is to try to make sure that if you do invest your valuable time here, that we do everything we can do to make that investment worthwhile. And again, the only thing that we can say is that we will try like crazy to fulfill that responsibility, because we all take it very, very seriously. So thank you. And let's kind of continue the track that we were on. We were talking about education. We looked at a quote. I wanted to follow it up with a little bit more substantial primary source quotation, and it's pretty much in the same vein. It's about the same thing. It happens to be in where I am in a particular class that I'm teaching now. So these documents are kind of laying right on the desk, and I thought, why not use them? They're right here. And before we do that, I want to encourage you to feel free to call and offer your comments or your suggestions or criticisms or whatever. I have not ever received a call on this program or on any program like it that I've ever been involved in that hasn't been worthy, that hasn't been a worthwhile thing to hear. So please feel free to pick up the phone and give us a call. We have a number reserved just to get you on the air. It's area code 304-658-3333. 304-658-3333. And if you'd like to communicate directly with me, by all means, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. We looked at a one-sentence quote from John D. Rockefeller's legal counsel in the late 19th century. The source, the document that I'd like to call your attention to now is an article that appeared in June of 1889 in the North American Review, and the title of it is Wealth. And the author of it is Andrew Carnegie. And if there was ever a situation where somebody who was talking about wealth knew what he was talking about, it's Andrew Carnegie. This article, when it was republished in other parts, in Great Britain, for example, it was reprinted under the heading, The Gospel of Wealth. And I ask you to think about that, because what is it we think of when we use the term gospel? We are basically suggesting the Word of God from on high. And so, in a sense, the implication is that in the area of the generation of wealth and free enterprise and industrialism, there's nobody that comes close to knowing it better or being able to explain it with more clarity and more depth than Andrew Carnegie. So basically, this is Carnegie's gospel addressed principally to the people of wealth. But we'll get to that. What I want to do is just look at a couple of paragraphs, and these are a little bit longer. So if you'll bear with me and just kind of grab the meaning here, and I'll try to return and clarify some things. But I'd like to get this, because I don't want to take a whole lot of time with this. I want to get to the standards. He begins his article as follows. The problem of our age is the proper administration of wealth, so that the ties of brotherhood may still bind together the rich and poor in harmonious relationship. The conditions of human life have not only been changed but revolutionized within the past few hundred years. In former days, there was little difference between the dwelling, dress, food, and environment of the chief and those of his retainers. The Indians are today where civilized man was then. When visiting the Sioux, I was led to the wigwam of the chief. It was just like the others in external appearance, and even within the difference was trifling, because this and those of the poorest of his between this and those of the poorest of his braves. The contrast between the palace of the millionaire and the cottage of the laborer with us today measures the change which has come with civilization. Let me pause and just make a quick comment here. You'll notice that he says the problem of our age. So in other words, he's suggesting this is our major challenge today. The proper administration of wealth. Notice, it's not the creation of wealth. It's not the way we create it. It's not what we do or feel like we have to do in order to be successful. None of those things. The challenge is the proper administration of wealth. In other words, what those people who gain wealth should do with it. That's his major problem. And he basically says, if you go back a couple of hundred years, you couldn't tell who was the chief and who was the Indian. Because where they wore, what they wore and where they lived and how they acted and the environment they lived in were all pretty much the same. But now, as a mark of what we call civilization, we have a distinct contrast between the palaces of the millionaires and the cottages of the laborers, which bear testimony to the degree of change that has come with the civilization we are creating. Back to the text. This change, however, is not to be deplored, but welcomed as highly beneficial. It is well, nay, essential for the progress of the race, that the houses of some should be homes for all, that is highest and best in literature and the arts, and for all the refinements of civilization, rather than that none should be so. Much better this great irregularity than universal squalor. Without wealth, there can be no Maecenas. The good old times were not good old times. Neither master nor servant was as well situated as today. A relapse to old conditions would be disastrous to both, not the least so to him who serves, and would sweep away civilization with it. But whether the change be for good or ill, it is upon us, beyond our power to alter, and therefore to be accepted and made the best of it. It is a waste of time to criticize the inevitable. To paraphrase, what he is saying, then, is while a mark of our civilization is the fact that a few live in palaces and the many live in cottages, it is not a change that we should deplore, but rather a change that we should welcome as being highly beneficial. It is essential to the progress of the race, he says, because the houses of some, the wealthy, should be homes for all that is highest and best in literature and the arts. In other words, what's best in literature and arts, what's best for our culture, would be lost if it wasn't for the success of these people in becoming extremely wealthy enough to keep literature and the arts alive. All the refinements of civilization would be gone if we didn't have these wealthy people who made it a point to keep them for the benefit of the rest, for all the rest of us. If we tried to do anything in order to return to the time when everybody was kind of the same, in the process, we would be sweeping away civilization along with it. But then he says, at the very end of that paragraph, whether it's a change that would be good or bad, it doesn't matter because we don't have the power to change it. All we can do is accept it and make the best of it, because what we would be doing is criticizing the inevitable, and that's a waste of time. So what he is suggesting, this is the analysis, what he is effectively saying here is that in the process of bringing civilization along, the result is that much of that civilization consists of the generation of wealth. And the result is that a few people become extremely wealthy and the vast majority of people don't. But that's not something to worry about. That's something to be proud of. Because it means that there are some people who are going to be able to keep the very best of what man has ever created alive. That's civilization. That's progress. And the fact of the matter is, what we are doing is totally consistent with the progress of nature itself. He doesn't mention Darwin yet. But there's no question that in Darwin's research about the struggle for existence and survival of the fittest survive and the race is benefited because the fittest reproduce. And the particular qualities that have allowed the fittest to survive are passed on to the next generation, which means the next generation is stronger than the previous one. And as Darwin argued, that's the way progress happens in nature. What Carnegie is saying is applying those same ideas of competitive struggle and competition is the way that societies experience progress as well. We can't do anything about it. It's here. To criticize it is a waste of time. The only beneficial thing we can do is accept it and make the best of it. And then I'm skipping. There are two more paragraphs that I want to share with you, and then we'll get off this totally. The price that we pay for this salutary change is no doubt great. We assemble thousands of operatives in factories, in mines, and in counting houses, of whom the employer can know little or nothing, and to whom the employer is little better than a myth. In other words, the result is a large, expanded, very impersonal industrial development, which means that people work in mines and factories and counting houses and never even know the boss. It's a totally impersonal situation. All intercourse between them is at an end. Rigid caste systems are formed. And as usual, mutual ignorance breeds mutual distrust. Each caste is without sympathy for the other, and ready to credit anything disparaging in regard to it. Under the law of competition, the employer of thousands is forced into the strictest economies, among which the rates paid to labor figure prominently. And often there's friction between employer and the employed, between capital and labor, between rich and poor. Human society loses homogeneity. The price which society pays for the law of competition, like the price it pays for cheap comforts and luxuries, is also great. But the advantages of this law are also greater still. For it is to this law that we owe our wonderful material development, which brings improved conditions in its train. But whether the law be benign or not, we must say of it, as we say of the change in the conditions of men to which we have referred. It's here. We cannot evade it. No substitutes for it have been found. And while the law may sometimes be hard for the individual, it's best for the race, because it ensures the survival of the fittest in every department. There's Darwin. We accept and welcome, therefore, as conditions to which we must accommodate ourselves, great inequality of environment, the concentration of business, industrial, and commercial in the hands of a few, and the law of competition between these as being not only beneficial but essential for the future progress of the race. Having accepted these things, it follows that there must be great scope for the exercise of special ability in the merchant and in the manufacturer who has to conduct affairs upon a great scale. That this talent for organization and management is rare among men is proved by the fact that it invariably secures for its possessor enormous rewards, no matter where or under what laws or conditions. And I'm going to stop there. What we have here in these 3 paragraphs is what I think becomes one of the most comprehensive, insightful, and valuable passages in what free enterprise industrial capitalism is all about in the late 19th century from the guy who knows best. We pay a price for industrialism and manufacturing because the workplace becomes impersonal. Castes are formed, i.e. unions. If you are a fan of Downton Abbey, you probably are struck by the conversations that happen among the kitchen help while the food is being delivered upstairs to where where the elite resides and dines and socializes. And the stories that are told among the kitchen help about the kinds of things that go on upstairs, and the attitude of the people upstairs toward the people who work in the kitchen. And what happens when the twain meets? If any kind of human relationship seems to happen between people of different castes, how appalling it is. So all of these things, Carnegie admits, are negatives that come with this. But the point is that even though the circumstances are difficult for individual people, for the race, in other words, for the civilization as a whole, it's worth it because it's progress. It gives us access to things that most people could never have access to because it brings quality goods to people at a manageable price. It provides jobs, it creates opportunity, it generates income, but naturally it also generates fabulous wealth for a few. And we have to accept this. It's inevitable. But it's a good thing. And once we accept it, we have to give these people the freedom to do their thing. It follows that there must be great scope for the exercise of special ability in the merchant and the manufacturer who has to conduct affairs on such a grand scale. That this talent and this organization for management and efficiency is rare among men is proven by the fact that it generates enormous rewards. They become fabulously wealthy. What he is suggesting is that these people don't get wealthy because of how they behave or what they do. Wealth merely becomes a measure of how rare they are and how rare are the skills which they bring to the process. Therefore, it's only right that they should get these fabulous rewards. They drive civilization. They make it possible for the rest of us to experience the best in an improving quality of life for everybody. Granted, there are costs. Granted, people lose, etc. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that if you take this content and you work it, and you massage it, and you read between the lines, and you ask questions about it, then youngsters, however well they read, can begin to understand and, more important, begin to realize that they can really understand, they can really learn. Even though for years people have been telling them that they're stupid and they can't learn. Once they get into this and really have the opportunity to engage it, they begin to realize that they can learn. They can think. They can contribute. They can learn to play this game. So the question becomes, what happens when the vast majority of people in society, rather than just the few select who come from the right families and the right neighborhoods and the right background, are encouraged to think and learn and question, and are given the opportunity to learn the skills that make it possible to really be successful in the academic world? Heck, I can read laws, I could go to law school. I could be a manager. I could get a degree in management. I can start my own business. I would suggest to you that this has the potential of totally reversing the educational process in America. Instead of a system which tends to beat down 5 for every one that it rewards, this system has the potential of rewarding all 5 or 6. It has the potential of opening up the idea of equality of opportunity for people really. And then it gives them options. Jefferson said, Franklin said, education will set you free. This is the kind of education that will do it. Let's look at some of the Common Core standards. I have the history standards. Naturally, that's where I would go. But also, just to be somewhat fair, I reproduced the standards in literature. And I just want you to understand how the standards are organized, what they're designed to do, and the kinds of things they ask students to do in English, in literature. Okay. These are the reading standards. These are the standards in English, and they're organized into categories. The first category are key ideas and details. In other words, at the end of this particular unit or this particular grade level, these are the standards for grades 11 and 12 in literacy, in literature. Under the category of key ideas and details. Standard number 1. In other words, after completion, students ought to be able to do the following. 1. Cite specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary sources, connecting insights gained from specific details to an understanding of the text as a whole. 2. Determine the central ideas or information of a primary or secondary source. Provide an accurate summary that makes clear the relationships among the key details and ideas. And 3, evaluate various explanations for actions or events and determine which explanation best accords with textual evidence, acknowledging where the text leaves matters uncertain. So those are the standards against which students will be measured in their test performance in the area of their ability to get at key ideas and details. Under craft and structure, the structure of literary pieces. Second category, number 1. Determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text. In other words, be able to read and comprehend, this is me talking, to be able to comprehend what you read in such a way that you can determine the meanings of words and phrases from the context, from the way they're used, rather than going to a dictionary and reading a definition of terms. Including analyzing how an author uses and refines the meaning of a key term over the course of a text. For example, how James Madison defines faction in Federalist Number 10. Second standard under craft and structure. Analyze in detail how a complex primary source is structured, including how key sentences, paragraphs, and larger portions of the text contribute to the whole. In other words, being able to recognize that if you took out this paragraph, the whole meaning of the whole package, the whole text, would change. This is a key paragraph. This is a key sentence in the key paragraph. Being able to recognize how a particular piece of the whole contributes to meaning and understanding of the whole. And third standard, evaluate authors' differing points of view on the same historical event or issue by assessing the author's claims, reasoning, and evidence. In other words, being able to understand how an author's conclusions are drawn, where he gets them or she gets them from, and whether in fact the author makes clear the evidence to support those conclusions, recognizing in the process that there are differing points of view of different authors. Students need to be able to do that in what they read in literature. Third, integration of knowledge and ideas. Standard 1. Students need to be able to integrate and evaluate multiple sources of information presented in diverse formats and media, visually, quantitatively, as well as in words. in order to address a question or solve a problem. Students need to be able to understand and to recognize and to be able to do it. That information, data comes in different forms. It comes visually. It comes via audio. It comes in words. It comes in numbers. They need to be able to integrate all of those facts and informations in order to address a question or solve a problem or understand a piece of text. Second, they need to be able to evaluate an author's premises, claims, and evidence by corroborating or challenging them with other information. Students need to have the experience of confronting information which challenges the conclusions reached in the original text. They need to be able to handle differences of opinion on the same thing and be able to sort through and analyze them to the point that they can draw a conclusion. Third, they need to be able to integrate information from different sources, both primary and secondary, into a coherent understanding of an idea or an event, noting discrepancies among sources. And then under the last category, the range of reading and the level of text complexity. By the end of grade 12, students need to be able to read and comprehend history and social studies texts in terms of their complexity proficiently and independently. Those are the standards, the literature standards for grades 11 and 12 in terms of reading. There is also a set for writing, what students need to be able to do in writing. Let me be straight up here. This is asking students to go to a level of depth that students never go, to engage in exercises they've never been asked to do before, to make meaning above and beyond the meanings that's there in the written text, to question it, to confront evidence which contradicts what the text says, to be able to confront differing opinions on the same thing or the same event and be able to work out the contradictions and the inconsistencies. And to be able to draw their own conclusions and to be able to recognize the difference between primary sources and secondary sources. In other words, the primary source is what the original person who lived the experience says about it. The secondary source is what a person who did research on it, wrote a textbook, says the meaning is. Students need to be able to distinguish between them. In history, there are reading standards and there are writing standards. If you look at the standards, and again, you can go, just type into your browser, into Explorer, just type in Common Core Standards, and you will get a website that talks about the rationale and how they were developed and what they're intended to do and all that, and then you will have a link there that says Standards. And if you click that, you will get the standards. You will get a table of contents, which will identify literature standards, history standards, mathematics standards, science standards, all of them. And then you go where you want. What I did is I reproduced the page on which the reading standards in history and social studies are in 3 columns. The standards for grades 6 to 8 students, the standards for grades 9 and 10 students, and the standards for grades 11 and 12 students. They are divided into the same 4 categories. key ideas and details, craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, and the range of reading and the level of text complexity. So what I want to do is compare the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders with the 9th and 10th graders with the juniors and seniors. Same standard, but look at the level of sophistication as the grade level goes up. In grades 6, 7, and 8, under key ideas, students need to be able, quote, to cite specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary sources. Grades 6, 7, and 8. They are going to be looking at both primary and secondary sources, and they're going to be conducting analysis. In other words, they're going into critical analysis of those sources, both primary and secondary. They need to be able to cite specific textual evidence to support their conclusions. They need to be able to make an argument and back it up with evidence based on what they read or what they see, if it happens to be a chart or a graph or something like that. That's grades 6, 7, and 8. For 9th and 10th graders, same standard. They need to be able to cite specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary sources. That's what the previous one said. But this one goes on. Attending to such features as the date and origin of the information. They need to be able to do what they did in grades 6 and 7 and 8, but they also need to be able to locate it in terms of time and place and context. Then when they get to be juniors and seniors in high school, it becomes even more complex than that. Cite specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary sources, that's 6, 7, and 8. Connecting insights gains from specific details to an understanding of the text as a whole. That what they need to be able to do is extract the details and understand the details to the point that they are able to understand the total text. They are able to comprehend what they read, and they are able to cite the evidence that supports their conclusions about what they read. That's one standard of 10. Standard number 2. Determine the central ideas or information of a primary or secondary source. Provide an accurate summary of the source distinct from prior knowledge or opinions. This is grades 6, 7, and 8. They need to be able to determine what the central idea is of a particular text, whether it's primary or secondary. They need to be able to provide an accurate summary of the source, distinct from what they knew coming in, distinct from their whatever opinions they might have had about the issue. They need to be able to show that they've learned something. That's grades 6, 7, and 8. Now look at grades 9 and 10. Determine the central ideas or information of a primary or secondary source, same thing as the previous group. Provide an accurate summary of how key events or ideas develop over the course of the text. In other words, be able to see how events and issues tend to build one upon another, how situations develop, how events occur, the kinds of things that lead to particular results. And then finally, for juniors and seniors in high school, determine the central ideas or information of a primary or secondary source, so far the same. Provide an accurate summary that makes clear the relationships among the key details and ideas. Be able to connect the key details and the ideas and understand them and be able to engage them. All of those are under the idea of being able to focus on the key ideas and the details. Under craft and structure, grades 6, 7, and 8, determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text, including vocabulary specific to domains related to history or social studies. Begin to pick up some of the language that is particular to history and social studies itself. Focus on the words and understand the ideas and the concepts and the language. for ninth and 10th graders to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in the text, including vocabulary describing political, social, or economic aspects of history and social studies. Now you're getting into not just what happened and in what order. Now you're looking at political history, social history, and economic history, and the integration of all of them happening at the same time. And then for juniors and seniors, determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in a text, including analyzing how an author uses and refines the meaning of a key term over the course of a text. For example, Madison Faction, Federalist Number 10. In terms of integration of knowledge and ideas at grades 6, 7, and 8, students need to be able to integrate visual information in charts, graphs, photographs, videos, maps, with other information in print and digital texts. I would suggest to you that the AP exams, the advanced placement exams, for the best students in particular subjects, what makes the AP exams so difficult for so many students is that it asks students to integrate visual information. They are presented data from charts, graphs, photographs, videos, cartoons, maps, songs, poems, and they have to be able to integrate all of it and draw meaning, make sense out of it. What does all of this evidence tell us about the period we're looking at? According to these standards, students will be able to do that in grades 6, 7, and 8. In grades 9 and 10, they'll be able to do that with something else. They'll be able to integrate quantitative or technical analysis, charts, research data, with qualitative analysis in print or digital text. In other words, not only will they be able to draw meaning from graphs, photographs, videos, cartoons, maps, and charts, but now, in addition to that, they'll be able to add quantitative and technical analysis and information from research and be able to link it all together, be able to recognize and separate the quantitative from the qualitative, and out of that be able to demonstrate that they can extract meaning from these things and make sense of it. In other words, they can write what would be the portion of a chapter in a textbook in history because of the raw data that they have that's presented to them in these various forms. They're able to do that in the 9th and 10th grade. In grades 11 and 12, integrate and evaluate multiple sources of information presented in diverse formats and media, visually, quantitatively, as well as in words, in order to address a question or solve a problem. They're able to write essays, argumentative essays, in which they use the facts that they are presented in order to back up an interpretation of what the facts mean. We are at 48 minutes after the hour. We've got about 10 minutes left in today's program. Let me give you one more example under integration of knowledge and ideas. Grades 6, 7, and 8. Distinguish among fact, opinion, and reasoned judgment in a text. Be able to recognize what's fact, what's interpretation, what's opinion, what's spin. To be able to decipher facts from interpretation, propaganda from evidence. The students will be able to do this. The basic assumptions being made in those articles we looked at that are criticizing the Common Core suggest that this is impossible, that kids can't do this, except for a few of them. And that's the system we want to preserve. I would suggest to you, this suggests that all kids will be exposed to these kinds of activities. in grades 9 and 10, assess the extent to which the reasoning and evidence in a text support the author's claims. In other words, literally, the student is going to be shown how to look at what an author says something means and be able to determine whether, in fact, the author provides the evidence to support that conclusion. Or is the author merely expressing his own opinion? Is he only saying what he wishes people would conclude, but there's no evidence to support it? Students have never been given the option of making those kinds of determinations. And then for juniors and seniors, evaluate an author's premises, claims, and evidence by corroborating or challenging them with other information, doing research, checking out the conclusions that the author reached to see, in fact, whether the evidence backs up the author or contradicts the author. Not believing everything you read because it's in a book, but actually questioning the validity of the author's conclusion based on the evidence the author provides. These are the history standards in reading for grades 6 through 8, 9 and 10, 11 and 12. There are also writing standards. In grades 6, 7, and 8, number 1, students will be able to write arguments focused on discipline-specific content. Students will be able to write argumentative stuff based on discipline-specific content. A, they'll be able to introduce claims about a topic or an issue, acknowledge and distinguish the claims from alternate or opposing claims, and organize the reasons and the evidence logically. They will be able to support these claims with logical reasoning and relevant, accurate data and evidence that demonstrates an understanding of the topic or the text using credible sources. Sixth graders will be able to do this. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left in the program, so I'm going to get away from the text and try to bring all of this to a conclusion. These are the Common Core standards that have already been adopted by 46 of our 50 states. Do these standards doom our students to failure? Are we setting out to ask our kids to do stuff that they can't do? Are we prepared to show students how to do these things? Or are we just going to basically hold the standards up, prove to the students that they can't do them, and basically consider them residue? Or are we going to actually begin to train our teachers so that they can teach kids to really do this stuff? Because the one thing I've noticed about all of this is I haven't seen that many teachers who can do any of this themselves, let alone teach kids how to do it. These are high-powered skills. And in the process of mastering them, if kids are really going to be shown how to master them, they will be being given the keys to academic success. They will be able to experience success, learning success in an academic environment, and all of the opportunities available to the educated will become available to them. That's a revolution, if indeed it really happens. But if it doesn't, if this merely becomes a demonstration of what kids need to be able to do, but you can't do, then we're going to be in worse shape than we are now. I would suggest to you that these standards, to me, promise both incredible challenges and the potential for incredible success. I would suggest to you, if we really do commit ourselves to teaching kids how to do these things, we will be preparing them for success at the college and university level. We will also be preparing them for the challenging skills of the modern contemporary workplace, because it's only people that can do these kinds of things that have a chance to keep up with the kinds of technological changes associated with the information communication revolution that we've been talking about. Racing with the machines, as we called it. The only way that people have a chance to remain employable is to be able to pick up these skills. This is it. This is the secret. The box is open. The secret is out in these standards. This is what it is, whether it's law school, whether it's med school, whether it's Harvard, whether it's Stanford, whatever it is. Here it is. Can we do it? And can we show kids how to do it? Can we really teach kids how to play this game? Can we really use education to give people equality of opportunity in this country? That's what the founders said they wanted to happen in this country. That's what they said they wanted this nation to be. That's what the republic they created is all about. That's the definition of an educated citizenry. People that could recognize the difference between information and spin. People that could recognize the fact when they're being fed a line and when they're being given true information. So that they themselves, they don't have to have their parents tell them or the local school board tell them or local businesses tell them. They become sharp enough to be able to see through this stuff for themselves. That's the educated electorate that the founders promised that this republic would need to have in order to thrive. I think that this is potentially the greatest reform effort, possibly, potentially, that we've ever had. It's the first time we've ever been willing to give everybody access to this stuff. But if we turn around and use this as a weapon and hit kids over the head with it in order to tell them and convince them that they're too stupid to be able to do this, then it'll be a massive, abject failure. But if we don't, if we really make a serious effort to teach people how to do this, and teach people what engaging information and learning, lifelong learning is all about, because once you do this, you never stop learning. You keep reading and you keep learning and you keep going from one situation to another. It creates opportunity. It's what freedom is about. Potentially, this is what American exceptionalism is all about, is giving kids the keys to access this stuff. If we do it, we will indeed be exceptional. If we don't, we would be committing one of the biggest disservices ever. I would suggest to you the gauntlet is down. The challenge is there. And I would suggest to you that this is the basis for American success in our ability to compete in a global environment, in a global economy, in a global situation, in a competitive world. It is 5 p.m. in the East. Our time together today and this week is at an end. I want to thank you so very, very much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. We'll get together again next Monday. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center on the study of the U.S. Constitution and civic responsibility. Thank you so very, very much.